And greetings. Happy Monday. Hope all of you had a great weekend. I'm Steve Deace, Todd Erzin, and Aaron McIntyre here with me. Let us know who you are and what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can email the program, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, Parler, Gab, and now Getter, GETTR, by the way. You can go to all those places and check us out there. Just look for my name. You can also follow me on Twitter at Steve Deace Show. And again, it's DEACE. And if you're looking for clips of the program that are free for you to share and sample, but also free of censorship, you will find them at rumble.com/Steve Deace Show. Again, that's rumble.com/Steve Deace Show. A little hat tip to our colleague, Rob Eno, for today's shirt. All right. Saw him sporting this, went out immediately and purchased one for myself. It says Fauci lied and people died. So
yeah, I need one. Yes,
they're available right now at Amazon, with an emphasis probably on right now. All of a sudden, if these things start getting popular, Amazon's going to be like, yeah, we maybe don't want to carry that shirt. Okay. So thank you, Rob, for letting me know this shirt existed so that I will annoy everybody. In fact, today is our family grocery shopping day and everything when I get off the air here. So, I mean, I'm going to be wearing this all over the place today, so.
Hope to start some nice positive conversations.
That's me. I mean, I'm always looking to edify. People know that. They know that I have the spiritual gift of encouragement. They know that. All right. Encouraging you not to be an a-hole. That's my spiritual encouragement here today. Don't be a douche. How's that? Is that good?
We'll see where it gets you.
Right. There's another promo for Yaron right there.
At least that's about as good as I get, probably, is maybe a good way of putting it. I'm in a bit of a mood today with what has gone on this weekend. I mean, I wish I had one of these things with me right now. Yeah, I know I'm supposed to tell you that tasers are non-lethal self-defense weapons. They're small and lightweight. You can carry it around in your purse or the glove compartment of your car. And yet, despite being a small in package, they pack a wallop in incapacitating an attacker, and it's saved hundreds of thousands of lives. I know that. I know that's what I'm supposed to tell you, but I'm just really in a mood to just indiscriminately tase. Can I say that? Is that a crime, by the way, to indiscriminately tase? Do you know?
Should we find out?
Well,
I'm in a mood to maybe find out. You can, by the way, in most U.S. states, own a taser device without a permit. So if you're thinking, I could really use a little non-lethal self-defense and fun, you can get your taser today, Taser, Taser. Just go to taser.com and use the promo code Steve. You'll get 15% off at taser.com, promo code Steve.
Odds are higher than ever before that random tasing will hit somebody who deserved it anyway. So
indeed. I'm in the mood to watch a good tasing. I might even just jump online here during the break. Go on YouTube and just search tasings, and just enjoy the scene for at least a few minutes. I'm in the mood for a good tasing. We are going to tase you some lies and distortions, because whoa nelle, have they been flowing freely all weekend long. This is one of the worst weekends for disinformation I can remember since this thing began.
That's
saying something. In fact, it might be the worst, where everyone's wrong and right. People are actually right from the wrong premise. I mean, it's just...
I couldn't keep up with it.
The truth is a chloroformed room right now, okay? So at the bottom of this hour, next hour, we'll have our Monday Town Hall as a way of saying thank you to our Gab following. We eclipsed over 10,000 followers there. So as a way of saying thank you, they get to do the Ask Me Anything this week, and so they'll get to ask the questions for our Town Hall next hour. But at the bottom of this hour, I am going to attempt to filter through as much distortion as possible when it comes to vaccines and efficacy and the Delta variant and the data. And I have no narrative here. We're just going to look at data. That's all we're going to do. All right, we're going to move beyond, because what do you do now when Covidstan's house is divided against itself? What do you do now when Fauci and CDC are now doing dueling, and I don't mean D-U-A-L, D-U-E-L. They're at loggerheads. They're doing dueling narratives because CDC is putting out dueling samples of data that are not reconcilable either. All right. What do you do with this? You have a very, very confusing weekend. So at the bottom of this hour, we will attempt to filter through as much of that distortion with clarity as we possibly can. But before we get there, of course, we begin with even more clarity, courtesy of Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by schizophrenia. The White House and its allies can't quite get its messaging straight on anything related to coronavirus. Late last week, White House Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre hinted at more lockdowns.
If scientists come to you at some point down the line and say, it is our opinion that there should be shutdowns and there should be school closures, you would do that?
Well, we listen to, like I said, we listen to the CDC and the expert and their guidance.
Not too long later, though.
The way we see this is that we have the tools in our tool belt to fight this variant, to fight this vaccine, and we are not going to head towards a lockdown.
Nevertheless, over the weekend, Joe Biden was asked if Americans should prepare for more restrictions because of the Delta COVID variant.
In all probability.
NIH Director Francis Collins had this really super not confusing thing to say about the Delta variant.
It is reaching very high levels, and we are now once again seeing case levels per day closing in on 100,000, which we haven't seen since February. So this is really a different virus than last year.
On Friday, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky told Fox News the government was, quote-unquote, looking into a federal vaccine mandate. Later, she tweeted, quote, to clarify, there will be no nationwide mandate. Meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci says you're violating other people's rights by not wearing a mask.
So a person's individual decision to not wear a mask not only impacts them, because if they get infected, even though they say it's my decision, if I get infected, I'll worry about that. But the fact is, if you get infected, even if you are without symptoms, you very well may infect another person who may be vulnerable, who may get seriously ill. So in essence, you are encroaching on their individual rights because you're making them vulnerable.
By the way, here's what Dr. Fauci had to say about personal rights back in April.
What objective outcome do we have to reach before Americans get their liberty and freedoms back?
You know, you're indicating liberty and freedom. I look at it as a public health measure to prevent people from dying and going to the hospital.
You don't think Americans' liberties have been threatened the last year, Dr. Fauci? They've been assaulted. Their liberties have.
I don't look at this as a liberty thing.
In completely unrelated news, the American Medical Association stated last week that sex should be removed as a legal designation on public birth certificates.
Science!
The CDC imposed eviction moratorium ended over the weekend. Renters all across the country now have to actually pay their rent again if they don't want to be kicked out. In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo says,
private businesses, I am asking them and suggesting to them go to vaccine-only admission. Go to vaccine-only admission.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem tweets, workers whose employers are mandating a vaccine for continued employment have the power to say no. Our robust economy and job market gives them the option to find a new employer that values personal choice and responsibility and doesn't force mandates on their employees. In Europe, protests against vaccine passports hit a fever pitch in places like France and Germany, where hundreds of thousands took to the streets over the weekend. Meanwhile, in Australia,
are you going to be going suburb to suburb, street to street, door to door, knocking on these and actively looking for people who are in the wrong house and finding them on the spot?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Overnight, we conducted hundreds of checks, particularly of those who were close contacts or who have the virus, Thankfully, everyone was home as they were supposed to be on health advice.
Also in Australia, the military then has been deployed to enforce lockdowns in various localities. A reminder about daily defiance. I want videos of you, yes, you listeners and viewers of the show, speaking at your local school board meetings or other public venues, holding your local officials to account for either COVID restrictions or other pressing issues. Send your defiance to dailydefiance1776@gmail.com or on Twitter @DaceProducer using the hashtag DailyDefiance, and your video clip could be featured on the montage. And finally, this
is through the partnership that
That's Joe Biden at some governor's event being handed a note that says, quote, "Sir, there's something on your chin." Biden appears to wipe it off and perhaps put it in his mouth. And that's what happened while we were away.
We all have elderly grandparents and parents that do things like this. They just usually do them in nursing homes, not while they're in the White House. Right? So that's good. Aaron's Montage brought to you by Rough Greens. We've been telling you about them for quite a while now. It is the supplement powder that you spray on your dog's food so that all the vitamins, minerals, nutrients likely stripped from that food once it left the factory go back in so your dog feels and even maybe looks better and healthier. But you might be thinking, hey, what if our dog doesn't like it? You know, we mix that stuff in with our pet's food and they reject it. So, you know, it was a waste of my money. Well, here's one way to find out. We'll just give you the 14-day Jumpstart bag to get you started. We'll give you that for free. You just pay for the shipping, but the bag itself is free. So a couple bucks out of you for the shipping. The rest is on us to see if you don't see a difference in your pet in 2 weeks or less when you go to roughgreens.com. RUFF for roughgreens.com, or call 833-ROUGH-DOG. Again, that is 833-ROUGH-DOG. To Aaron's montage we go, and I'm going to get into more specific data next segment, all right? But for now, I want to give you kind of a general overview as you're watching the whole system here collapse. I mean, Covidstan is just, it's collapsing upon itself. And it's even arguing with itself right now. I mean, I'm seeing tweets from former CDC officials who have been lockdown Larrys this entire time that are now like, we just can't follow this any longer. It's all over the place. And the irony of this is that it's all coming at a time when our overall COVID profile as a nation has never been better. Let me give you some examples, all right? Right now, on average, according to HHS, only 1.88 of all hospitalizations in America are somebody with a COVID positive test. Only 1.88 out of 100,000. That's our national average. Let me give you some more. In July, the U.S. suffered 8,361 total deaths with COVID. Last year, we suffered 9,335 in the last week of July alone. An average of 270 Americans died with COVID per day in the month of July. If we assume all of those were deaths because of COVID, they weren't. But even if we assume that would make COVID only the 7th worst killer in America. In other words, not even an epidemic. Slightly higher than diabetes. About 240 Americans die per day of diabetes. And COVID is a little bit higher than that. That's your 8th place killer. According to CDC's own data, and I posted these charts today on all of my social media accounts. So you just go, all of them have these charts. You can grab them yourself. According to CDC's own data, you currently have a 99.5% chance or better of surviving a COVID infection if you're under the age of 65. You have a 99.41% of surviving a confirmed case of COVID before we even stratify for age and comorbidity. So a 0.5 IFR for everybody under 65 and a 0.59 CFR for everybody before we ever stratify for age and comorbidity. And then you look at our old pal, Sweden. Now, Sweden is undergoing a vaccination drive as we speak. So it's gone from 37% fully vaccinated about 10 days ago to 41% fully vaccinated now. In the month of July, Sweden recorded a grand total of 9 deaths with COVID. They actually code their COVID deaths similar to us. Anybody dies for any other underlying reason but is positive for COVID, it is counted as a COVID death. In Sweden, in the month of July, they had 9 in a nation of over 10 million. Lowest mask compliance in all the EU, least locked down country in all of the EU, and again, 41% fully vaccinated. These trend lines are all really good. And you may think, why do we have all this confusion with this kind of trend line everywhere? See, I used to think that way too. And then I lived through the past few years. And I've evolved. I've gone from asking questions like, why in the world do we have all this confusion given these data trends, to realizing, after what the last few years have done to me, I now understand and realize that we have all this confusion because of these data trends.
Not a bug, a feature.
Yes. See, it is these. This is how you know that these data trends I'm citing for you are all accurate. Because this is why there's so much confusion. This is why not even Covidstan can get on the same page. Because all of the empirical data works against their agenda. And so when that happens, when you no longer have the lid on the data, that outside of this and like 4 other platforms at this time last year they had a total lid on the data. It's more than 4. Probably 7 or 8 people with platforms that we were kind of joined with at this time last year pushing back on this. But now the problem is this data is all over the world now. It's all over the world now. Everybody's looking at this stuff now. Now you've got CBS now using data to question Anthony Fauci. Because here's the other thing, as I told you last year. All branch Covidians voted for Biden. Not all Biden voters are branch Covidians. Even in St. Louis County, that's right, St. Louis County, they don't want to wear Chinese face diapers anymore either. Gavin Newsom has a recall within the margin for error. If you think he's rolling out tomorrow with face diaper mandates for all, as the great prophets Judas Priest once sang, you got another thing coming, okay? Gretchen Whitmer took a look at her internals earlier this year, and around the same time the Michigan Department of Health told her to shut it all down. She not only didn't shut it all down, she reopened everything, got rid of the masks. How come Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, I should say, how come Asa Hutchinson is getting he's basically become the Mike DeWine of David French's. Well, he's not running for re-election. So he gets to show you his true colors. He doesn't, I need a special session so we can face diaper the kids again. He gets to do that because he's not running for re-election. Think he'd be doing that if he were? No. Similarly, Mike DeWine is all night, well, I don't think we need more mandates and masks. We got other ways we can take a look at dealing with this in Ohio. A few of you, when I post this data, you'll tweet back to me or you'll Facebook back to me or comment back to me. It's just too bad none of this will matter. You're dead wrong. All of you are dead wrong. You're somewhere between wrong and soft. You bet your sweet bippy it matters. Because if it didn't, places like Michigan and California would look a hell of a lot more different right now. Even Cuomo knows. He's basically begging the private sector to help alleviate some of the political strain on him. Hey, do you guys mind imposing some of these vaccine mandates yourself so I don't have to take all the heat? You know, I mean, they can just vote me out. They can't like vote out every CEO of every chain restaurant or every big box store. So could you guys take on some of this burden as well? Do you mind? I would really encourage you to do that. Take some of this off of me. It absolutely matters. Because let's go back to the very first day of the show this year. What's the answer around here?
Us.
Us. It absolutely matters. Looking at this kind of data, if your kid is masked this year at school, that is a you problem. That is a you problem. Don't send me any emails complaining about it. Don't. Circular file, all will go. I believe most of the country has a little thing called a school board election here coming up in a month, correct?
Yes, they do.
Yeah. And every school district has a school board, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are usually open forums, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe you're still allowed to pick up a phone or send an email or a text to other parents that feel the same way as you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. See, this is what government by the consent of the governed means. It means you have as much tyranny as you will consent to. This was never going to end until we made it end. It was never going to end ever before that. I told you this in May when the masks went away for the first time. We are winning, but did I say we had won?
No.
No. Did I say they were in retreat? Yep. But is retreat the same as surrender? Nope. You're going to have to make them surrender. You're going to have to, the same way every other generation had to make all other forms of tyranny surrender. And it's going to take more of a confrontation than a speech or a very eloquently worded Facebook post. You're going to have to make it end. So if us arming you with all this data lends you to the conclusion of it won't make a difference, that's on you. Then it's your problem. You're perfectly willing to consent to it, so don't bitch, don't complain. Take it like the plebe you are. Take it. Enjoy it. Relish it. It's inevitable, so just lie back and enjoy it. That's on you. That's on you. Don't curse your administrators for your kids choking out this year. Look in the mirror. Don't say Candyman 5 times. Say your own name. That's on you. At some point, you'll all have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Notice the enemy is perfectly comfortable making you uncomfortable. They seem to, or shall I say, he seems to, really enjoy it, as a matter of fact, gets off on it. So then do something about it. You can see they can't get on the same page because they have no narrative right now. They don't have one. They have united both sides of this against them. There were those of us from the very beginning who pushed back on lockdowns, called them immoral, so they wouldn't work, pointed out the data that they don't work. And then there's another group of people that also thought better to be safe than sorry, and let's wait till we get vaccines, and then that'll be the key to getting our lives back. They have plunged up the rectum both of these groups of people now. They did it to the first group all of last year. And now we're sitting here with all kinds of economic and mental health data along the lines of everything we warned you about all of last year with lockdowns, that the juice was not worth the squeeze, that the cure was worse than the disease. Well, now there's another tier of people that thought they were going to get their lives back and not have to wear these face diapers anymore if they got vaccinated. And now they feel like they've been had and they've been lied to too. Covidstan's running out of a base here. The ground is shrinking beneath their feet. That being said, the ground was shrinking beneath Hitler's feet for many, many moons. And it wasn't until he heard the tanks from Allies approaching both the east and west of Germany within earshot that he went down into the bunker and did himself in. He was losing that war 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months beforehand. It was just a matter of when it was lost. But dude didn't bite the bullet literally until it was clear there was no other way out. He was cornered. They're not going to just, until that moment, there will never be a time that Covidstan will just say, all right, we tap out. You're right. Good argument. You beat us. Appreciate it. Nope. You're going to have to drive that point home. And you're going to have to do it in spite of a lot of Republicans, like, say, Kristi Noem, who has now failed 2 major tests to protect femininity from the rainbow jihad and to protect you from corporate fascism via the jab. Now, what do those 2 issues have in common? On the surface, they may seem to have nothing in common. Oh, but they have everything in common. See, the rationale, the motivation for her disappointing stance on each is the same. She prefers business interests and defending those to your individual freedoms and liberties. That's why she went soft on trainee madness, and that's why her eloquently worded tweet is just, go get another job. I got nothing for you. Now it kind of makes you think that maybe her real valiant stance against Covidstan last year really wasn't so much about protecting the individual rights and freedoms and liberties of South Dakotans as much as it was protecting South Dakota's business interests. That seems to be, how do you reconcile now what she did with COVID on what she's done with the 2 biggest issues that have emerged in the country since? Forced vaccination and gender trainee madness. The only thing that reconciles them is she's just chosen the side of business interest on all 3. Businesses didn't want to be shut down last year. Businesses don't want to lose an NCAA event because, and the traffic and tourism for that because you took a stance on the trainees. And businesses want to be able to tell you and dictate to you what you do and don't put in your body in order to work here or be a customer here. That's the only consistency. Steve, so we want government to meddle in business now? Government's job, and only job, is to protect my God-given rights. Businesses don't have rights. Neither do governments. People do. Individual people do. And their job and the pledge they take is to defend our freedoms and liberties against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. But you're right. I'm sure if some Tory loyalist after the Redcoats left Yorktown decided, you know what, I'm going to have a few hang back and join me here in my pub or at my silversmith shop or on my farm, I am sure the founding fathers would have said, it's a private business. They can do what they want. Right. So this is the opportunity. The enemy here is in a state of mass confusion. They are scattered. They are divided between the political realities of what the American people are still willing to tolerate and then their own fanciful vision quest of what they would still like to do. When your enemy is divided, when they are scattered, that is the moment for you to take advantage. But we have to take advantage. What's the first word of take advantage?
Take.
Take. We must take advantage. It will not be handed to us. We must take it. Fauci lied. People died. Back with hour 2 here, live and on demand on BlazeTV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace alongside Aaron McIntyre and Todd Erzin. You guys have been very, very patient. I appreciate that. We're going to let you talk here in just a few minutes. First, let us know what you think about what we think. Look for me, Steve Deace, on Facebook, MeWe, Parler, Gab, now Getter. You can follow me on Twitter at Steve Deace Show or email the show, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Again, DEACE is how to spell the last name. And if you, again, want to see free clips of the show that are also free of censorship, go to rumble.com/Steve Deace Show as well. Again, rumble.com/Steve Deace Show. Finally, if you're a podcast listener, thank you. You played a major role in the massive growth of this program, particularly in the last year. Please, if you haven't done so yet, hit the 5-star review up for the program. Also, the subscribe or follow button, depending on which podcast platform you prefer. Those of you that have done that, thank you very much. You have also played even a larger role in our growth, and we cannot thank each and every one of you enough for doing that for us. So thank you again. All right, coming up here this hour, it is our Monday Town Hall Ask Me Anything, brought to you by our friends over at ExpressVPN. So you probably think when you're browsing incognito that you really are incognito, right? Not so much. You ever read the fine print of that? It says that your activity still might be visible to your employer, school, your ISP. So how do they even get away with calling it incognito? To really stop people from seeing what you're doing online, you need to do what I do and use ExpressVPN. I've got it installed on all of my machines, including my phone and my laptop here in the studio. Because if you think about all the times you've used Wi-Fi at a restaurant, a coffee shop, a hotel, your parents' house, every site you visit could be logged in by the administrator of that network. And that's still true even when you're using incognito mode. You want to truly go incognito, check out ExpressVPN. It encrypts all of your network data, reroutes it all through a network of secure servers so that your private online activity stays just that, private. You literally just use this with one button. You tap it to connect, and your browsing activity is secure from prying eyes. If you want to stop letting strangers invade your online privacy, protect yourself at ExpressV as in victory. expressvpn.com/Steve. Again, use my link, expressvpn.com/Steve. Find out how you get 3 extra months for free. Find out how to get 3 extra months for free when you go to expressvpn.com/Steve. All right, let's get to it. It's our Monday Town Hall. Ask Me Anything. Our followers over at Gab will get to ask most of the questions this week, but we're going to let Todd and Aaron chime in first and foremost, because you guys were very patient while I just unloaded data, a cornucopia, a bazooka cannon of data here in the first hour of the show, trying to provide some clarity to what I think is the most confusing weekend we've ever had since COVID began. So we'll start. Aaron, I'll go with you first. What do you think?
So after listening to all of that and seeing the wide swath of vaccinated, unvaccinated, natural immunity, not natural immunity, and the reasonableness of why the countries that were chosen. I've seen a few people posit this or play around with the idea that there is really no such thing as the Delta variant, that this is just a 5th, 6th wave, similar to the Sunbelt wave that we had last year, which makes sense. It's really, really hot outside. People are heading back indoors more often for longer periods of time. Could you make the case that this is, based on the data that you just shared, could you make the case that there really isn't a Delta variant?
I could. Now, I could make that case implicitly. It could be implied from the data in that you're seeing similar trends of behavior according to the data. I can't empirically say that. I don't have the means by which to test that in a lab. I'm not qualified to do it. Even if I were, I don't have the means to do that. Okay? But could this just essentially be the second Sunbelt wave? I mean, in terms of the behavior of our media and everybody else, A lot of the same conversations. We were looking at immigration numbers across the border last year, right? And looking at those counties that bordered Mexico and Texas, and the overwrought percentage of COVID cases and hospitalizations that per capita came out of like Hidalgo County compared to the upper part of the state. A lot of this does seem to be the same conversations we were having a year ago. Okay. And I would also agree that even the data of more transmissibility and fewer deaths also would line up with the notion that it's just this longitudinal wave scenario where now there's fewer elderly that have not either been vaccinated or have natural immunity. So there's less available of the most vulnerable, number one. Number two, we have treatments we're offering. Now, I don't think much of the data on remdesivir. I'm much more positive on the data on Regeneron. That's what Trump was actually given last fall. That's I believe, the brand name for the monoclonal antibodies, I believe. Yep. All right, so we're doing more treatments than we were doing this time last year, where we were still in, if you test positive, go home, isolate. If you can't breathe, go to the ER, they'll put you on a ventilator. So between a healthier population that's more aware, more treatments, some role of therapeutic vaccines, and then less amount of dry timber out there for a virus to infect a second time around. Would this line up from a data standpoint? And I know some of the people you're talking about, they're all data people too. And so the data profile does look, I don't know that it would look much different. If we were just calling this the second Sunbelt wave and not a Delta variant, I don't know that it would look much different in our country. So I would not dismiss that claim at all, but I'm also not qualified to make that claim at the same time.
Sure.
Todd, what about you?
Well, I just saw Justin Hart post a little while ago something that is not going to come as a surprise, but
he's one of our OG Covidstan pushback OGs from day one, guys. Yes.
Just want to reset it. I don't know the population, the particular country he's talking about here, but he's been solid all the way through. 96% of deaths had 2 or more comorbidities. 67% of deaths had 6 or more existing conditions. 87% of hospitalizations had 2 or more conditions. Now, India, that number 5,000, put in context of that place's that country's population. Listen, we're talking about data. We're not talking about the value, theologically speaking, of individual lives. But it is a tiny, tiny number. You know what they don't have over there in India per capita like we have? Obesity, diabetes. Hey, it's not a paragon of health over there, but they don't have those things like we do. I put all that out there to ask you this question. Why do I have to care about the efficacy of vaccines on any level and advocate for that? Even though the anti-vaxxer here, Steve is absolutely right. You don't be stupid. Don't deny the fact that they have some therapeutic value. But it's not full stop there. This is not a disease that is a thief in the night of children or the person my age. Right now, this is not any more dangerous to me at my age and my health condition than the flu is. It just isn't. So until we start talking about comorbidities and age stratification, if you show me a graph that talks about it's only the unvaccinated that are getting this, why should anybody like me participate in the vaccines have a therapeutic value conversation at all? Why should I give anybody that grace? Will not give grace on any number of fronts?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think that there is, I think, a distinction that I feel I have to draw between how I push back against people that want to impose their will on me unfairly, and then what my general mission is with this show, which is to pursue the truth. Okay?
Yeah.
Since my intention in this conversation is just to figure out and to help myself and others get to a place of clarity during what has become now the most confusing moment, I believe, since this entire thing began. On that level, I'm just now, I'm not an ideologue. I'm now just, let's just start with what the data says, and let's establish some form of plumb line here. Because right now we've got the CDC arguing against its own narratives. It's putting out two different narratives at the same time. It is putting out data that shows there is a possibility of a higher viral load in the vaccinated. Where actually there is data in a place like Israel where that could seem to be true, actually. The problem is it put this data out from our country using a study in India with a completely different vaccine that was not peer reviewed in a paltry vaccinated country, number one. And then number two, it put it out using what it did cite in our country specifically contradicts what their holistic data also shows. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So we're in a place right now where even when CDC is warning us about something that does exist in some other places, it is using terrible evidence and data to do that. And so spot the lie. Yeah. I mean, the first thing I think we had to do here is get to a place of clarity and plumb line, because we are dealing, I am pro-life. I'm not allowed to bear false witness. That's my belief system. I don't get to do to you totally what you get to do to me. My belief system doesn't allow me to do that. I don't get to return mustard gas for mustard gas, and I know you agree with that.
Yes.
Right? So we're always going to be at some form of a disadvantage. Well, we assume we're at some form of disadvantage tactically because there's just some depths and that we can't plummet to. This is why I want to start with what's the truth. Because I think the way we overcome tactical disadvantages like what you're talking about, why should I give you any benefit of the doubt when you still won't allow there's not a single state in this country still, not even Ron DeSantis' Florida, where they have made it available for you to go get an ivermectin prescription specifically for COVID anywhere you want in a state as a prophylaxis. Not one. So if you're going to lie about that, why should I give you the benefit of the doubt on anything? To me, that argument comes into play when you want to mandate something on me and we go to the public policy standpoint, right? Yeah. But before I have to get there, I believe, to know what the truth is. And so like a good friend of ours texted us during the break. They're so fed up with this, they're going out and getting a high-priced civil liberties attorney to push back on this. And they said, hey, if you were his client, what would you want to ask him? And I said, we need some form of a lemon test here, okay? Because right now,
there's a lot of lemons.
Yes, because right now, what efficacy must the state prove to infringe on civil liberties? Because we all are pro-life on this show. If data showed that masks absolutely were lifesavers, would we have taken a different position on this in the last year, perhaps? Perhaps. To some degree.
Yeah.
To some degree, okay? We still might have taken not big a fan of a mandate, but you do need to know you are taking somebody's life into your own hands if you don't wear a mask. At the very least, we would have done that.
Yes.
At the very least, right?
Yes.
But did the data show that?
No.
No. So right now we're in a position, and I think this is where the premise of your question is solid. We're in a position right now where Covidstan doesn't have to prove any efficacy at all, and then just gets to impose.
Yes.
Okay? And that leaves us arguing against impositions. But that's a difficult argument to make, because the minute we come out the minute we come out against impositions, the immediate pushback is you hate grandma, you're trying to kill people. Because they don't have to establish any efficacy. It's like if a prosecutor got to accuse you of murder, but never had to present any evidence that you did it. Right?
Right.
And then you just go up there to defend yourself, and every time you could point out data that I wasn't even in here. I'm not on you videotaped the event. I'm not in there. And the whole time they get to say, what do you just want murderers to go free? You love murder, do you? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the judge just sits there and says, all right, hey, murder's bad. They accuse you. You're guilty. We can't win that way. We have got to force them to prove, and I'm all for people like Liberty Counsel. I just gave them, I'm about to give them the biggest individual donation I've ever given anyone in my life. So at this point, I would argue by any means necessary to exempt yourself from a vaccine mandate, by any means necessary, because we don't know the long-term efficacy of these vaccines or their side effects. We don't know that. But eventually, we got to win an argument where we establish a precedent that the state must prove some form of efficacy before it dares to impose on civil liberties, that the juice is worth the squeeze. Right now, we don't have that because I said so, because the data. Even in the cases we've won, like I cited last hour, where Gretchen Whitmer overrode her Department of Health in Michigan, did she do that because of poor efficacy or poor internal polling? What do you think the answer is?
The latter.
The latter. At some point, we must establish a legal framework where there must be an efficacy threshold that the state must cross before we begin even having conversations about limiting civil liberties. If we don't do that, then it's always going to come down to might makes right. There is no law. There is no rule of law. It's just rule of mob. And my mob is bigger than yours, or my mob has guns and yours don't. Right now, the state doesn't have to prove any efficacy. They just get to make claims. They get to make claims that the vaccinated are spreading the virus, take 2 days to put out their data, and then the data they put out actually contradicts all the other data they've previously put out on the subject. But still, vaccinated must wear masks. Do you know? So I'm trying to get us to a place where the burden of proof is on them and not just us. What is your lemon test? What is your efficacy threshold? And no, I need more than every study ever done on the question showed masks don't stop airborne viruses, which is why we haven't worn them for flu season our whole lives. And then suddenly, when it becomes the new political solution in June of last year, a switch gets flipped and you're just loaded for bear with studies that show masks worked, but none of them are controlled studies or randomized studies. Funny how that works. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If we don't force a debate on efficacy, then we have nothing to push back with other than we just have our own mob now. And eventually they're going to wear us down. And eventually people are going to say, yeah, this is so bad, we have to do something about it. So I want us to figure out, first and foremost, do these things work at all and to what rate? There is simply there is no data anywhere in the world, in this country or anywhere in the world, that shows that these vaccines limit transmission of this virus to the justification of a mandate. They just don't. They just don't. We should force them to have to prove that they do. Right now, they haven't been forced to have to prove that the masks work. Nothing. And so I'm trying to drag that question out. I'm trying to force them to meet some credibility threshold other than trust the experts, follow the science, right?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, and then some.
But when it comes to interacting with would-be tyrants, I think your attitude is exactly correct. I will grant you no accommodation because you have granted me none. So I don't believe we're unevenly yoked here. And the Bible commands me not to be unevenly yoked. All right. So this is where we kick the dust off our sandals. And Jesus says it would be better for Tyre and Sidon. Now, what was unique about those places? Correct me if my biblical history, if I'm wrong, but I believe those were the countries that Jezebel was from, or the cities of the country that she was from, like the worst queen in all of the Bible. Her husband, the worst king in all of the Bible. So what Jesus is basically saying is those cities that provided the worst of your ruling class, it will be easier for them on the day of judgment than it will be these other places that have rejected your message. So if you come to me and say, I get to impose my tyranny on you, then I'm going to come back the way you just suggested. No, you don't. And I will offer you no benefit of the doubt because none is being offered to me. So my answer is not just no, it's hell no, and come and try to enforce it. Let's see what happens. But in another arena, it's a little bit like, do we kick the dust off our sandals or do we provide apologetics for our belief system? Yes. Depends on the situation.
Yes.
Okay. When it's very clear that this is not an honest conversation happening here and you're not open for business intellectually, that is when I kick the dust off my sandals and move on. Until it's clear there, though, then we provide the apologetic framework for why we think this way. And I probably could have just simplified my answer by just coming up with that.
It was all good.
Like 10 minutes ago. All right, more questions. Aaron.
We'll go now to something completely different. Doug McCone says, I'd like to hear your opinion of Iowa State's conference future.
The most awkward. Oh, gosh, I love this show. This has got to be the most awkward segue of all time.
You're welcome.
My opinion is that Iowa State and the rest of the Big 12 would be wise unless the Big 10 or Pac-12 come calling. And then if they do, then you have to kind of look after your own backside. But barring that, they would be wise to stay together for as long as they can, to force Texas and Oklahoma to stay in the conference for as long as they can, all the way to the last day, and milk the amount of money that will come with that association for as long as they possibly can. That would be my first piece of advice, to be patient. That's my answer.
These situations actually have a lot. It's not as awkward a segue as you think. They have a lot to do with each other. Just terrible people doing terrible things terribly.
Yes.
To one another. The plumb line for truth. What's the purpose of science? What's the purpose of a university? What's the purpose of athletics? Nobody has any idea anymore.
That's an excellent point.
And about it's business. If one more person says it's just business, you're all liars. Every damn one of you. It's not supposed to be fundamentally a business. You need to understand the business side of it. But the reason we're in this position is because all you foos keep drinking that Kool-Aid over and over and over again.
Well said. Up next, Vaughn asks, how do you endure the cost of being the final vaccine holdout remnant in your family? I'm getting so much pressure and feel the media and administration has manufactured this hostility and empowered civil discourse within the family. The church doesn't seem to help either by punting on these issues.
Well, I think, first of all, are you the last holdout for a good reason? Okay, are you the last holdout just because I don't want to give in, because I started off skeptical and I'm going to end it that way? If you look at one of the most seminal works in the history of the faith, whether you agree with it or not, you cannot argue that Martin Luther's 95 Theses did not change the trajectory of Christianity in the world. And if you read the introduction to them, you can basically sum up his preamble with these words: all of the Christian life is a life of repentance. So I think we always have to check our own motivations. And doing the right thing for the wrong reason because the results are good, that will get you celebrated in conservative political circles, but that's actually not how the Christian ethic plays itself out. Actually, there's more benefit to failing for the right reasons than succeeding for the wrong ones. So we got to constantly check our motivations. By the way, that's not my argument, Vaughn, for you to go out and get vaccinated. But to me, the question you're asking about is broader than vaccination. This could be applied to anything that the world or the culture or the world system squeezes in on us about. Okay? So just remove the term vaccination and put anything in there. Put trannies in there, abortion in there, rainbow jihad, put anything in there. The same principle would apply. First, let's check our own motivations. Are we doing this out of pride, or are we doing this sacrificially out of service to our Lord? That's the first thing we should check constantly. Because if it's about the latter, then the perseverance of the saints becomes a lot, well, I wouldn't say easy, but it's still easier to understand the reason why we're doing these things. Pontius Pilate is questioning Christ in the back room as he's being accused by the religious leaders of leading a sedition. And Jesus says to him, for this reason, I came into the world to testify to the truth. So that's our reason. So if we're his and he is ours, and we take on the identity of our master, of our Savior, of our Lord, then for this reason, we remain in this world and we occupy in this world until he returns, to testify to the truth. That's often why you hear me say the truth is its own reward. All we do is testify to the truth. What they do with it or don't do with it, not our problem. So, are you just holding firm because of ego and you don't want to give in? Or are you testifying to the truth? And sometimes what you're going to find is, you know what? I really kind of was just holding on for ego, but the more and more I examine this, I still had the right position, just maybe from the wrong motivation. And now you realize, so I'm just going to handle it differently. And I'm re-energized to stand in the gap. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's always value in checking our motivations. That ultimately our motivation ought to be to testify to the truth. To testify to the truth. That's why we're here. Testify to the truth. So that would be my first thing for you, Vaughn, is to question that. And I think when you come to a right and proper understanding of your own motivations, I think you'll find your resolve will be strengthened accordingly.
Speaking of testifying to the truth, the next question is from Lee Train, who wants to know if you've heard of the Jar Jar Binks is a Sith Lord hypothesis.
I've heard of virtually every Jar Jar Binks theory, okay? But I'm a little familiar with this one, yes. So
basically, Palpatine was orchestrating everything behind the scenes. Jar Jar is mysteriously embedded in certain... what do you think of that? Do you think that's actually true?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't.
Moving on. Bellator says, what is your opinion on the Christian pacifist tradition as practiced by the Anabaptists, Amish, Mennonites, and the like? I assume you disagree with it, but why? We've got 60 seconds left here. I left you hanging out to dry.
I didn't even look at the clock.
Yeah, we need to carry that one over.
Yeah, we will carry that one over. Okay, but yes. Well, first of all, I disagree with it because I'm not Amish, Quaker, Anabaptist, or Mennonite.
That's because they don't have TVs. That's why you don't agree with it.
Well, I will admit that has played a role. It certainly played a role in helping me to aggressively pursue the and rightly divide the hermeneutic on this particular question. Right. Okay. Nice. Way to undermine me. Way to undercut me, although it's totally accurate. So I appreciate it. But in general, Christ comes and confronts culture head on. Confronts it head on. Doesn't retreat to a quiet, his own private Idaho, but he comes and confronts it head on. I'll have more to say about this here when we come back. So you like a good snack throughout the course of the day, but you'd rather not pack on the pounds doing it. I've got great news for you because Built Bar is here to save the day. It's the best thing that came out of 2020. Now don't laugh. I know it's a low bar, okay? No pun intended. But Built Bar, see what I didn't mean to do there. But Built Bar would have cleared it even if 2020 wasn't such a crappy year, because it's the best protein bar you've ever had. All great flavors, all covered in real chocolate, up to 18 grams of protein, 180 calories or less. Even if you get one of the more, shall we call them, decadent flavors like coconut brownie chunk, you can't beat it. You're just not going to find a better product with more nutrition and less sugar and calories. And I should also mention, easy on the tummy as well. All right. So if you want to save 15% off your Built Bar order, use the promo code DEACE when you go to built.com, BUILT. For built.com, use my last name, Deace, as your promo code. They'll give you 15% off at built.com. All right. A question, we just lost track of the clock. Let's repeat the question that was asked of me right before the break. All right, so let's put it up there again. Do you mind?
So this is Die Bellator. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. What is your opinion on the Christian pacifist tradition as practiced by the Anabaptists, Amish, Mennonites, and the like? I assume you disagree with it, but why?
I don't believe you can claim to be Trinitarian Orthodox and a pacifist. Because the God in the Old Testament who orders the Israelites to go into Canaan and become here's your sword, your army, you're my real-time urban renewal program. And they weren't serving CDC-approved eviction notices, right?
Right.
They were going to war. Either, if you're a Trinitarian, the God who ordered that is Jesus. Jesus is God. So, and of course, if you run astray of Trinitarianism, my belief on that is you're somewhere from error to other places you don't want to be, according to historic Christianity. So right away, you're denying the character of God in your pacifism. And then what about the end of the story? Jesus returns with a sword in his mouth and a robe dipped in blood. He returns to wage war. So I just don't see how pacifism lines up with the character of God on any level. Now, I've got a lot of respect for the character in the film Hacksaw Ridge. The movie was brilliantly done by Mel Gibson, because what's happened in these Anabaptist traditions is they haven't just become pacifists. They've become retreatists. At least the gentleman in the movie Hacksaw Ridge is like, oh no, this evil must be confronted, and I'm going to confront it up until violating my no violence credentials, or I shouldn't say credentials, convictions. What these traditions you've cited have done is I think they've not only denied some of the full aspect of God's character and persona, but then they've just retreated from the world itself. Now, why would you have to retreat from the world itself? Because there's no non-confrontational way to engage the world. And the minute we get into any form of confrontation, it can escalate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just that they don't want to do any violence. They don't want to do any confrontation. I will listen to those who would argue against a non-violent approach. I don't agree with it, but when you go from non-violence to non-engagement, you just don't get any more engaging than God coming in the flesh in the form of a human child to be Emmanuel, God with us, to get tired as we do, to have to use the restroom as we do, to get hungry as we do, to thirst as we do. You don't get any more confrontational than that. So there's what is often described as pacifism in these traditions is really passivity. That would be my answer.
Next up, I'm really interested to see your answer on this one from Jay Claw. Is it time to start civil disobedience in our large corporations?
Yes.
such as in clever ways that result in quiet but significant loss in productivity. We know that about half of the workforce is in no mood to be mandated.
A resounding yes. Yep. So you do these things now while you still have a platform so that they then can't take your platform away later. This is why I keep saying, if this were to devolve to violence, that would be a failure on our part. It's because we did not use the peaceable means we have to push back. So our friend Shannon Joy sent me something that in Rochester, a large group of nurses have basically said to the medical facility up there in Rochester, New York, good luck firing us all. Can't replace us all. We're not doing your vaccine mandate. Yes. That's an act of civil disobedience. Yes. I mean, there is a long cherished tradition of civil disobedience, really from the very beginning of Christianity. When the Sanhedrin, who was the ruling, not just the religious, but also the civil rulers, because the religious code was the civil code, when they said to Peter and John, you are not permitted to preach this Jesus as Messiah message any longer. They got there before the Sanhedrin woke up at the temple the next day and were preaching it again. That is an act of civil disobedience.
This stuff dovetails so perfectly with the question.
Yes,
you
it
just
does. Yes, it does. See, pacifism, true pacifism, can be a noble position, even if I don't agree with it theologically, when it is not an excuse for passivity. Unfortunately, most of the time, pacifism is a code word for passivity. So I go back to Hacksaw Ridge. Andrew Garfield's character was not passive in any way, shape, or form in the face of evil. So anything he could do to stand up to it short of committing an act of violence that violated his conscience, he did those things.
And the most famous examples, MLK, Gandhi.
Yes.
Again, fire hoses, dogs.
Yes.
I mean, they weren't passive.
Yes. So passivity is what we often describe as pacifism in our culture today. But the reality is civil disobedience, they were high-pressured water hosed because they refused to comply, not because they were complying. Nero cut off Paul's head because he refused to comply, not because he was complying. Peter was hung upside down because he refused to comply, not because he was complying. So, I mean, there's too much freedom in this country. Rich, by our equivalent, millionaires or billionaires of the 18th century, almost all of them wealthy landowners, signed on to a document pledging their lives, fortunes, and sacred honors. And a lot of them paid it. A lot of them either were killed or ended up broke when it was over. The idea that we can't sacrifice a $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year job? Really? Okay then, that's your God. Bow down, worship your idol. Love your monkey, touch it. Let's think that's easy for you to say. Really? Really? The show hasn't risked anything in the last year and a half?
No, we've risked some things.
Yeah. Boy, man, if we were wrong about anything last March or April, would we be sitting here today in August of 2021?
No.
No, we were toast.
I'd be working at Come and Go.
No doubt. I'd be failing the quick trip managerial exam again. All right?
Circle of life, baby.
Yeah. So you do these things so that you don't have to do worse things later on. Absolutely. Is it time for civil disobedience? You bet it is. Mass civil disobedience. The spirit of the age isn't going to stop until the cost of imposing on you becomes higher than it's willing to pay. Why did they stand in front of those high water pressure hoses in the South in the 50s and 60s? Because there were a lot of white folks living in places like Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois. They weren't living in the most racially, even though there was no slavery or segregation in those places, they weren't living in the most racially diverse neighborhoods at the time. Fair?
Fair.
And so their kids would come home from school, they'd slap the TV dinner on the TV tray, turn on a little news before Milton Berle came on, and they'd sit there with their kids watching black folks get high-pressure water hose to the face by Walter Cronkite and Roger Mudd and Edward R. Murrow every night. And the kids would look at mom and dad and say, why is that happening in America? And even if mom and dad weren't from the most racially enlightened generation, they got really uncomfortable taking those questions from their kids every night, right?
Yep.
So now they start talking to their congressmen, senators, hey, you guys need to make that stop. I don't like the conversations we're having at home. I don't like the things my kids are asking me. That's grotesque. That has to stop. In other words, the cost of continuing that behavior by the spirit of the age, because that was the spirit of the age too. The cost of doing it became so high it couldn't afford to pay it any longer. But for that cost to reach that high, they had to be willing to defy. And so are we. We're going to have to be willing to defy. And it isn't until the cost of our of putting our defiance down is too high that you will get the spirit of the age to yield. That's why this is only going to end when we make it end, and that's what government by the consent of the governed means. Let me tell you about real estate agents I trust before we get to a final question here. If you are getting involved in the real estate market and given what's going on both in the real estate market, but markets overall, I would highly suggest, if you're thinking about doing it this year, now is the time. Particularly if you want to sell, housing values are soaring. But if you even want to get into that next home, you don't know what this economy is going to look like here in the third or fourth quarter, because we got a lot of 2008 type of trend lines staring us right in the face. So in these unprecedented times,
Bing.
Make sure you go in with a real estate agent you can trust. Now, where would you find such a person? Well, the name kind of says it all. realestateagentsitrust.com. That's the website. Chances are you might even run into a real estate agent from this very audience, because that's where it began, connecting trustworthy agents with clients deserving of them in this audience. And then that network just kind of mushroomed from there. realestateagentsitrust.com. Again, realestateagentsitrust.com.
One more quick and easy one to close this out. Maccabeus says, if Calvinism is true, why bother with anything?
Let's just remove that term, because you guys know what I think about terms, okay? And let's go to the idea of God predestining who is to be saved, okay? One person is qualified to open the book of life. Who is it?
One person qualified?
Yeah, who's the only person qualified to open the book of life? The
Lord.
lamb slain before the foundation of the world. Who's that?
Jesus.
Jesus. Who was it that sent this note?
Maccabeus.
Maccabeus? You ain't he. So you're not qualified to open the book of life and see who's in there. I'm not. You're not, right?
Right.
Now, this, by the way, is not an argument for this soteriology. It's just pointing out that this is a bad argument against it, okay? Number one, even if, you know what, I'll even stick with the term. Even if all 5 of the tulips in Calvinism are true, did God still tell you to go out and evangelize?
Mm-hmm.
So then what should you do when God tells you to do something?
Do it.
Do it. Should you just do it anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah, because who's God?
Him.
And who's not?
Me.
Me, yeah. Who is the only one qualified to open the book of life?
Jesus.
Jesus. Who's he?
God.
Lord. Yeah, God. Who are you not?
God.
God. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's other arguments you can make against Calvinism. This would not be one of them. In fact, you're actually affirming the argument for Calvinism, because you're showing them how much we truly disdain the sovereignty of God. That your argument is, if God doesn't make something worth my time, as I understand it, why should I do it? That's a pretty total depravity kind of impulse. So God has to make it worth your time? Really? Because God said so. That's why. Period. Like, that's not a good argument against Calvinism. It's not. In fact, you're probably going to affirm people in their Calvinism by showing how much disdain you truly have for the sovereignty of God, that unless God shows you there will be an ROI up front that you find worthy of your time, you just won't invest your time into something God told you to do. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a good argument. Final thoughts.
You want one more question?
Okay, if you think we have time, sure.
Yeah, I think so. Just quick. Willie47 says, what are your estimated odds that our country will ever have fair and honest elections without phony ballot stuffing as seen as in 2020?
Ask me that again after this midterm election without Trump on the ballot directly, okay? Because by every trend line, I mean, there's a train. I hear the train a-coming. It's rolling down the tracks. I mean, by every discernible data point, they about to get poleaxed over there on Team D in this upcoming midterm. I mean, it's going to take something beyond dramatic. Okay. I mean, the economic numbers, the confusion on COVID, the massive downturn on optimism for the country. I mean, these are just, we were talking earlier, we got some 2008 kind of economic trend lines. Yep. We got some 1994, 2014 kind of trend lines coming for next year, okay? That's why I want you to ask me that question again, because if these trend lines were to continue and you end up with anything other than a Democrat purge, then I would tell you your odds are probably pretty low. You know what I'm saying? So ask me this question again after we have this midterm election. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's how you'll find out if Trump was a convenient excuse or if they're just going to run this playbook every single time now.
Right.
That'll do it for today's show. We are back at it again tomorrow, noon to 2 Eastern, right after Glenn Beck here on Blaze TV. Until then, John 3:17.